morning and welcome to City Legal. If you're new or if this is your first occasion here, can I extend to you a particularly warm welcome, and to those online also. City Legal is a ministry, it's a ministry to the legal profession and to office workers within the Sydney CBD. City Legal exists to tackle the bigger questions in life by looking at what the Bible has to say about them. Our format is a 20-minute talk, followed by a 20-minute Q&A. And if you're online, you can ask questions via the chat function. And that's a great part of our meeting. And with David Robertson speaking to us this morning, Q&A is always challenging. David will be completing his series on Homo Deus. I think I've said it correctly, the future of humanity. There are two readings and they're in the outline, and I'll read them to get us underway. So the first reading comes from the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 26 to 28. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." And then our second reading comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17. "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here." I'll hand over to David. Thank you.
Thanks, George. David. Okay, we will definitely be finished by 8:20 because I'm heading to the Gold Coast because I'm told there's sunshine up there. So well, I just honestly, I never thought I would see the day when Sydney was wetter than Scotland. But anyway, that's the way it is. The month, the year, whatever. I've been reading this book by a guy called Os Guinness, and he says this: "We humans are a unique life form on the earth. We are the only species that asks why. We are self-aware to a degree that no other animal appears to be, yet we know too that we are in a world that doesn't explain itself." So that whole thing about questions, it's really important. And I would say that one of the big problems we have as human beings is we don't really question enough. You know, and I'm not sure that we encourage our children to question. I think that's, by the way, one of the huge problems in education, the lack of questioning. Now, we're going to look at, in the space of this short period of time, the future of humanity. How will humanity evolve? Is there still a future for us on planet Earth? How does this affect public policy? It's quite interesting. How do you become a Supreme Court judge dealing with human rights if you can't say what a human is? That seems to me a fairly complex issue. But what about you as an individual? What hope is there? Will there be a new humanity? And I'm just giving a review of Homo Deus, which we did Homo Sapiens, which was looking at the history of humanity. Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari is looking at the future of humanity. It's called A Brief History of Tomorrow. And it's an absolutely fascinating book. I'm going to summarize it, and I need to point out, as they put caveats, there are trigger warnings here. This is thoroughly depressing. So, you know, enjoy your food, but you'll see why it is depressing. Just to summarize the book itself, it's a very influential book. He suggests that throughout the history of humanity, we've focused on surpassing 3 obstacles: famine, disease, and war. And it shows you should be very careful when you write a book how quickly it dates. This book is less than a decade old, and he says we've beaten all 3: famine, disease, and war. These don't happen nowadays. And he suggests that in the future, we need to develop a new human agenda And the focus will be on lengthening human lives, achieving true happiness, and creating genetically modified superhumans. Now, a summary of the book would give you 10 basic points, and some of them I think are true, some of them are true and depressing, and some of them are, I would say, not true, and certainly not the whole picture. First one that's not true, he says humans will become gods, hence the title of his book. Homo sapiens, wise humans, are evolving into Homo Deus, God humans. We will have mastery over our environment, and we will have the ability to create and to destroy life. Now that ties into whole areas of public policy. So for example, the whole euthanasia debate, the abortion debates, the genetics, etc. Number two, wellness and well-being will dominate. Now, Harari has argued that the problems of human survival, mentioned those already, pandemics, famine, and violence, we've solved them. As I say, he was obviously clearly wrong with that. But he says that human beings will now focus on chasing immortality, wellness. You know that Google has an offshoot called Calico, and their purpose, their sole purpose, is to provide eternal life. You know that for some of you, if you want to, I think it's the site in Australia is in South Australia. You can be buried in a tube or a cave somewhere in the desert, and they will freeze your body, cryogenics, and they'll wait until they can find a point where they can bring you back to life. Well, that idea of immortality, chasing mortality, wellness, and enduring happiness, well-being, everything's about well-being. We have to be permanently happy. Personally, as a Scotsman, I despise permanently happy people. They make me feel really unhappy. You know, it just, someone who's permanently happy, there's something wrong with them. But anyway, that's what we're aiming for. Number three, the rise of the useless class, in which are included all lawyers. No. The cost of upgrading the human condition will be expensive, and it will be reserved for a tiny elite. One of the quirks about the Ukrainian war, you may have noticed this or not, is Ukraine is the #1 country in the world for surrogate mothers because of the poverty and everything else, and because of the laws, and a number of Australians have been caught out in that way. But you get a surrogate mother if you've got money. You can purchase people, you can purchase children. And Harari suggests that the masses are going to see jobs disappear as they're replaced by ever more effective and ever more efficient technology. And because human beings are more polluting than cows, then the argument will be we need a lot less human beings. We need to get rid of humanity. And you may think that these ideas are a bit extreme. Remember the terrorist attack on the mosque in New Zealand? What wasn't widely reported was, as well as being a bit of a white supremacist, the gentleman concerned was also an extreme environmentalist, believing there were far too many humans on Earth, and he just wanted to get rid of a few of them. Muslims and people of color, as it is said, were high on his list. But he was saying this was an ecological thing. And if you want to think of it like that, then you will. I've read people arguing that we need to severely limit the population on the Earth. The big difference between, there's always been what Marx would have called the lumpen proletariat. The big difference, or the Untermenschen, the big difference between that and today is this, that at least the lumpen proletariat or the Untermenschen can get jobs. But Harari argues that won't happen. You won't be able to sell your labor. Very interesting point that I hadn't thought about, and he made me think about this, was he talks about the death of humanism. Humanism is the dominant religion of the 21st century, the early 21st century. Humanism is a religion, by the way. It involves a faith. It does have its own creed. It has its own fundamentalist beliefs. Humanism, as Harari describes it, celebrates human intelligence, human experience, sensations, emotions, and thoughts, and human values. But he says that's all going to be eroded by science and technology. So, and he specifically puts it this way, human scientists will challenge the human superiority and human exceptionalism that's implicit, including the idea that humans are the only really sentient beings. We have feelings. That human reason is we're the only really reasonable creatures, and free will. He basically argues we are just animals with a God complex. Now, for Harari, and I think this is correct, if that were true, and I don't accept that it is true, then the implications for democracy, law, freedom, and human rights are massively significant. We are going to move from humanist politics, democracy, where the voter knows best, to the elites know best. The people are thick, basically. That's the, we need experts to tell us what to do. I mean, Harari couldn't foresee this, but many countries in the West over the past couple of years have largely been governed by experts who are not accountable to the electorate. Humanist economics, the customer is always right, or humanist aesthetics, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Humanist ethics, if it feels good, do it. Humanist education, think for yourself, will all disappear under this scientific technological revolution. So his fifth point is that this will be replaced. There'll be a rise of what's called techno-humanism. In our pursuit of immortality and happiness, we turn to upgrade ourselves through biological means, genetic, biological engineering, if you want to put it that way, cyborg bionic engineering, and computer, AI engineering. And this is, for me, the scary bit, because I think he's actually right, that that's where this is heading. His sixth point is that Al sapiens beats human sentience. Now, what he means by that, the ability to feel and our ability to reason. There's an argument about, can AI technology feel? And that's going to be interesting how that develops. We know that AI technology can compute, but can it feel? And does that matter? He argues that non-conscious but highly intelligent algorithms will know us better than we know ourselves, and will increasingly rely on AI algorithms to inform and guide us in love, life, and work. Who needs? I mean, the old messy way of going out to a pub and meeting somebody and getting to know them and then deciding you didn't like them. Well, you've got Tinder, why bother? You just click and choose. You select. You can now, and all the ways that you can select people. Human beings are commodities that can be sold, that can be bought. Love is just a chemical reaction. Take the right drug. I mean, if you want to get really depressed, read this and then watch Black Mirror. Now, my kid said to me, "Dad, don't watch Black Mirror," a number of years ago, because you'll just get mad. Well, I didn't get mad. It just manically depresses me. So I have to watch it every now and then because I go to a group that discusses it. And Black Mirror on Netflix, oh my goodness. It's just, so in that kind of world, you come into this building and you don't order your meal because the algorithm has already determined what you're going to eat and knows what you're going to eat. In fact, you don't even need to listen to me talk, because basically you'll get an algorithm who'll be able to tell you what I'm going to say. If you know me well enough, most of you probably work it out. But why do you need to bother getting to know or feel or understand? Because you could make mistakes. Get a computer to do it for you. He has this phrase, "I'm in love with your algorithms." So AI understands humans as sets of algorithms, formula, to predict and explain behavior. He's saying that we will go down that route as human beings. We will get rid of individuality, which has been the big thing for us. And instead of the individuals, there'll be this, then that style algorithms that replace our personality, passions, and profiles. Not that you've ever gone on it, but Match.com, just think that on steroids, as he puts it. It's self-knowledge through numbers. You are just numbers. And for that reason, his eighth point is that datism becomes the new religion. Now, I know someone working in data management in North Sydney, and they said to me, "David, data is the new oil." And that's why people are always trying to get your data. I hate it. Even though I work for Christian organizations who keep getting people's data, I constantly refuse to give people my data, or I sign myself as Bugs Bunny or Winston Churchill or something, because I know what people do with data. Always get data. And we're moving towards a situation where people will get data from your faces. Numerous cameras everywhere. This religion of datism replaces a human-centric worldview in favor of a data-centric worldview. The whole world is just data. Silicon Valley, of course, loves this. Life is data processing. Individuals and organizations are algorithms, and the value of human life is only in terms of its capacity to transform experience into data. In other words, if you can't make a formula of it, it's worth nothing. So this then brings us to what we know as the singularity. So Os Guinness, the guy I was reading earlier, talks about we live in a post-Hiroshima world, and I think also a post-Auschwitz world, but it's also a pre-singularity world. Now, the idea of the singularity is that all becomes one. Now, you can see that in terms of Buddhism or Hinduism, but in our modern world, the secular humanist religion is being replaced by this data religion where everything becomes one. In other words, it's the internet of all things. It's the matrix. We live in the matrix. If, and this is a mind game to play, but none of you can actually prove that you are not wired to a computer right now, lying in a vat of slime, which is telling you that you're in a building that's called the Law Society, eating a meal which doesn't really exist, listening to a man who doesn't really exist. It's just, this is all in your head. And how can you disprove that? That's actually very difficult because, when I was seriously ill, I think I genuinely believed at one point that I was the king of Norway and Colonel Gaddafi was trying to kill me. You couldn't argue me out of that. We experience, we think things. So this idea is, once we get this internet of all things, there's no need for human beings. Humans will vanish. What use are we? And so that's his 10th point. It's the end of humanity. The next step in evolution will ultimately see humans transform from semi-evolved simians, he says, into pure information, and we will break free from our carbon-based biological chains. Now, here is the absolutely fascinating thing. This is going back to the 1st century Gnostic heresy that we need to be released from our bodies, and that if only we could just be disembodied spirits or disembodied minds or disembodied computer programs, then everything would be wonderful, except it's not. Let me just say one or two other things about the book before giving a brief rejoinder to all that, and then we can discuss. As I said, when he says in the last few decades, this is a quote, we've managed to rein in famine, plague, and war. Well, pride goes before a fall. Wars too are disappearing, is what he says. This is an interesting analysis of human beings. People are made happy by one thing and one thing only, pleasant sensations in their bodies. Someone else saw that, a man called Aldous Huxley, whose book Brave New World was much more prophetic than George Orwell's 1984. Though if you put the two together, I think both of them pretty well got where we're heading. The idea is we re-engineer humanity so we can enjoy everlasting pleasure. After all, pleasure is only chemical. You can take a pill for it. You've all eaten nice meals, very tempted by it, but what if you just have a pill that gives you the same sensation? Why waste? So that whole idea of everything just being chemical, but not even chemical, because the aim is to get to non-organic beings, just neural networks free of organic chemistry. He argues, and I think this is correct, that humanism, the worship of humankind, has conquered the world, yet the rise of humanism also contains the seeds of its own downfall. In other words, it's self-destructive. Humanity is on a self-destructive path, ironically, in the name of preserving humanity. He talks about God being dead. He denies that humans have eternal souls. He says something that's quite remarkable. Our latest scientific discoveries flatly contradict this. Well, no, our latest scientific discoveries flatly do not contradict this. Our latest scientific discoveries have nothing to do with this. It's a bizarre statement, but it's a statement of belief. He argues that computers could have desires. I really hope not. The idea that my MacBook could have desires means it's going straight in the sea. He argues that potential virtual worlds are infinite. This is the kind of multiverse theory again. You know, you can go into any world that you want to be. Everything is chemistry, but in the future, we will be disembodied, soulless computer programs. He talks about the modern era being human beings giving up meaning for power. Well, I want to take that back. So this is where I would refute that. I would say that C.S. Lewis's book, That Hideous Strength, foresaw where this would go. I would say it will not work purely and simply because it is not true. You are not just chemistry. You are not just biology, although biology is extremely important to who you are. So is chemistry. But there is something more. You have a soul. You have a spirit. When the Bible, the passage you read, talks about a new creation, what does it mean? So in Genesis 1, we're told that we are made in the image of God. A.N. Wilson, the famous atheist, became a Christian when he read in Genesis, and so God breathed his spirit into man, and so the man became a living being. He said, I've never read greater words than that. And that is astonishing. You are a living, sentient, moral being with a spirit, with a body. You're not disembodied, but when your body goes, it's not the end of you. Christians believe in the resurrection of the body, the physical resurrection, and also renewed spirit and so on. When the Bible talks about the new creation, it's saying that eternal life is already within us. So Google have set up a company to give us eternal life, but it's an eternal life which is a disembodied, soulless, godless, meaningless, hellish one. It's my definition of hell, being stuck in a Google machine forever. I think that it's just endless. There's in one of the Black Mirror scenes, there's this incredible punishment that's given to a guy who's murdered, and he's forced to listen to, I can't remember, I think it might be Boy George or some pop singer, literally forever. With Barry Manilow, that's what it was. He has to listen to Barry Manilow forever. And it's just, I just thought, the thought of that, I thought, and he can't kill himself. You know, and you just think, he's stuck in this computer program listening to Barry Manilow forever. Honestly, you want a definition of hell? That's a pretty good one. So I would argue that Harari's view is such a messed up one in so many ways. In reality, he's seeing some things that are going on. But I don't think our world has an answer to that that's better than the biblical one. So that's where I'm going to leave it, and we'll maybe discuss and have some. And I'm sorry it's so heavy for a Thursday morning, but you're lawyers, you're going to go and deal with some heavy stuff, so you can cope.
Thank you, David. We're going to have a Q&A session. I suppose I should check if you're here, because you said that we might be listening to a man who doesn't exist, and as I'm getting a little bit older, my mind plays a few tricks on me. You are here, aren't you?
Well, George, yes, I am here, but I worry about you.
I appreciate it.
I think you're just an algorithm, you know.
Thanks, Jessica. Now, would you like to read them, or would you like me to read them to you?
If I can read.
Okay. And for anybody who'd like to ask questions from the floor, please let me know, and we can just move around with the microphone.
Okay.
Was Will Smith concerned that Chris Rock wasn't really there?
Well, actually, do you know, I mean, I'd love to, the whole Will Smith, Chris Rock thing, as soon as it happened, a magazine phoned me up and said, will you write about it? And I said, no, because everyone else will be. But I am going to eventually, because the reaction to it is just incredible. You could predict the reaction like an algorithm, you know, so from The Guardian going, hey, so anyone who criticizes Will Smith is a racist. Okay, to the right-wing press going, this is the first black-on-black violence televised, you know. I mean, yeah, so maybe Harari has a point. The problem with singularity is the next step is a black hole. Indeed. C.S. Lewis had an inkling of this in his book, That Hideous Strength. That's what I was trying to say, where the elite rule or try to rule. This is also in We, By, and I can't read that name, on which Orwell based 1984. Yeah, I think Lewis's That Hideous Strength is genius, because I think he foresaw where this was going to go. And I mean, every time I read it, and I've read it several times, I'm just going, how did you see that? Because, yeah, I agree with that comment. God's word shall not return to him void, Isaiah 55:11. So transhumanism will not prevail. What do you think? Oh, of course it won't prevail. It's like all the human philosophies. They don't prevail. I mean, I was a Marxist when I was 14, but then I grew up. It's just, I'm sorry that some of my university lecturers didn't grow up. I would have sent them into work for the proletariat so that they could get things out. But, there's lots of philosophies in life that, no, they're not going to prevail. I mean, Harari's whole thing here, we've got rid of famine, disease, and war. I mean, it's hilarious. You look at it, I'm watching on television a major war in Europe, and Harari's saying, well, we got rid of war. No, we haven't. And it just won't work. And the transhuman thing won't work. And actually, one of the good things about Black Mirror is the humanity eventually gets through. And that's always the hope for me, that the humanity gets through because we're made in the image of God. And here's the irony. I think that humanism without God, secular humanism, is fundamentally anti-human. Whereas I would call myself a Christian humanist, as John Calvin did, where because we have a holistic view of what humanity is, it means we have a better view of all human beings. I can't, when I look at the war in Ukraine, I can't go Russians, bad guys, Ukrainians, good guys. No, I see Ukrainian soldiers going around shooting Russian soldiers in the legs systematically. I see of Russian soldiers raping women. I just think this is humanity stuffed up, but there's also good, and within all of that. And I just think the very simplistic views that when you reduce humanity up to an algorithm, it's not really helpful. From a religious point of view, let me say this. I used to hate it. Well, I kind of loved it for a bit when Jehovah's Witnesses would come to the door, because I knew they'd been programmed how to work me out. So they would say something like, are you interested in religion? I'd go, yeah, a wee bit. And I'd invite them in, and then I'd ask them about the Greek and Hebrew. And I knew they had this 10-point program. This is a religious person. This is how you speak to him. This is what you do. And I would then bring out a Greek Bible and a Hebrew Bible and ask them to read it, and they couldn't, of course. And then I had some fun with them. But at some point, I would just say something like, look, forget the manual, forget what you've been trained, just talk to me as a human being about why you believe what you believe. Tell me what you feel, tell me what you think. And they couldn't do it because they'd been told this is what you do. By the way, I would say there's a lot of Anglicans and others who do evangelism that way as well. You say this, then you do this, and then you do this, and they think it's a linear process. It's not a linear process. It's just not. We're human beings, and we although we are logical, we are also confused, and so we go all over the place. I'll give you just an example. I was debating with a guy on radio online, and he was just vicious to me. And then I just made a kind of a disparaging remark about he quoted something, and I said, oh, that's from the Manic Street Preachers. I said, personally, don't you dare use them. They're my favorite Welsh punk band. There aren't many Welsh post-punk bands. I said, they're my favorite. And I said, I'm a Manic Street Preacher. I've got the t-shirt, And he went, oh, you like the Manics? Oh, you're okay then. And I thought, I've given you all this reason, logical argument, and you hated me. And I just say I like this Welsh band, and you now think I'm brilliant. Well, okay, fine. But that's how humans are, isn't it? Right. Sorry, George. You've got another one. Oh.
Josh?
Okay, I think that's working. You could say that the Welsh and the Scots are the common enemy in the English. I have two questions, if I can ask both. The first one is the singularity, meaningless, and then also with what it means to be human. There was a report in the Courier Mail in Brisbane last week about girls at this school starting to identify as cats.
Cats, yes, yeah. Well, okay. So first of all, as a Scotsman, I have to tell you, I was born in England, and my dad was English. So whilst we make jokes about things, there is a unity involved in that. The singularity, I think, does become meaningless, but I think it becomes oppressive too, because the singularity doesn't exist. And to try and make something exist that doesn't exist always causes harm. don't be too surprised. I mean, right now, the girls in Brisbane, that's a bit of a laugh. You know, they're identifying as cats, but don't be too surprised when transspeciesism will come in before transhumanism. I've no question of that. There's a whole group of people in Europe and America, and probably here, who want to identify as dogs and behave as dogs and so on. Now, part of that is a little bit of sexual kinkiness, which is what a lot of this stuff is anyway. But part of it is just absolute confusion. If you cannot, if you've got our political leaders unable to say what a woman is, how do you expect an 8-year-old girl or a 14-year-old teenager to do so? You know, and that's the mess that we're getting ourselves into because we're rejecting the concept, the biblical concept of humanity being made in the image of God. Let's go with it.
Todd's just got a couple on Slido, and
Yeah.
then there's some more ones there. Oh,
What's the value of humanity in the secular society and war? Well, actually, we're moving towards a stage where humanity now, suddenly people, it's the planet. It's only the planet that matters. The whole Gaia hypothesis and human beings, you know, we're just cockroaches on the planet, so get rid of us. I think there's a real problem there. If life is data processing like the scientist believes, well, no, I don't think scientists do believe that. I think some people believe that. They're philosophers, they're not scientists. Then what's the human value in terms of God's love and mercy? Well, there isn't one. How do we measure the value of humanity of Christians? Well, I'd quite like Christians to be human. I think sometimes people, I've just read this morning in Thomas Manton, a Puritan from the 17th century. He said there are some people who become religious and lose their humanity. Well, that's awful. You should become more human when you become a Christian. But when you turn Christianity into a program or a weapon, I think sometimes it does dehumanize. I'm not sure if that was the question that was being asked. I was asked a question from T in Canberra about, you know, is there a future for humanity with AI? Not according to Harari. So the answer to that question was basically the whole of my talk. I think just as Harari has been proven wrong about war, he will be proven wrong about all this stuff. And there is a future for humanity, a marvelous future. And there's a future for every one of us. And that is in the new creation, the new heavens and the new earth. We can still enjoy the journey and still enjoy the ride. But there is a better world coming. That is the most wonderful thing. You've got two choices in life, actually. You can either believe it's all going to end with an implosion or explosion, and it's all ultimately meaningless. We fade into nothingness, whether you call it the singularity or not. Or you can believe that this life is just the Shadowlands, and there's the reality to come, as C.S. Lewis put it beautifully. George, another one?
Todd, these are on the slide.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, a couple of questions from Slido. So this is from C in Canberra. Doesn't the future of humanity look pretty weak in the face of the incredible power of AI? And perhaps a related one, aren't we humans made in the image of God, not AI ourselves?
I answered the first one already. So the second one, no, we're not artificial intelligence. We're actually real intelligence. That's the point. I look at everyone in this room and I see you as real people who do have intelligence. One of the things I find incredibly depressing is we're governed by politicians, and dare I say it, even lawyers, journalists, and lecturers who think we're just machines to have input and that we really do lack intelligence. The most astonishing clip for me of the year so far is the Vice President of the United States explaining the war in Ukraine to American adults as though they were 3 years old. Now, Russia's a big country and Ukraine's a smaller country, and Russia attacked Ukraine, and that's not good. So let's nuke them all. No, I shouldn't say that last bit. But, you know, I mean, I hate being treated like an idiot. I think everyone has intelligence to some degree. And you just got to, you know, I say this often, the most difficult question I've ever been asked have been by 10 and 11-year-olds. You know, because they're still thinking. I think as we get older, we stop thinking, to be honest. If you see yourself as a machine, then Google's motto used to be that they were going to get rid of memory. You don't need memory, you just need Google. If you get rid of memory, that's called dementia. And I don't know of anything more dehumanizing than dementia. And I've had to live with and work with people through that. That's why I was glad, to be honest. I don't believe in euthanasia, but I was glad when my father died, as his brain began to disintegrate towards the end of his life, and the Lord in his mercy took him. So, you know, no, we're not artificially intelligent. We're real.
David, what about the issue of relationships? God is a God of relationship.
Yeah.
And dehumanization must mean a breakdown in relationships. So is that drawing us away from God?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you say, what about the issue of relationship? I was going to say, don't have them, you know, because as a teenage boy, the first girl, you know, this happens. Girls don't understand this, but, you know, the first girl you go out with, she breaks your heart and you can never trust a woman again. You're damaged for life. You know?
I must tell your wife this.
It's just a bit of therapy here, you know. It's just a bit of therapy, you know. No, look, we're relational beings, and the idea that we reduce relationships to chemistry comes into it, of course it does. But we reduce it to chemistry or just biology is appalling. But here's the thing about relationships: they're really hard work, you know, because we relate to one another, but we are complex beings, and the people we relate to are complex. And I just think that if we were just a little bit more humble and admit that we're a bit messed up, then it would just help us a lot to realize Homo Deus is such a horrible idea. Human beings as God. You know, what's that? Almighty Bruce or whatever it was film. So what's Bruce Almighty? The idea of being God for 10 seconds. If you're God for 10 seconds, you're going to wreck the world. You know, I just think I like the idea that we are moral, rational, emotional, spiritual beings, and we're not in charge. And we can relate to one another. And above all, in relationships, we can relate to God. That's what Jesus came for, to enable us to relate to him. And again, in the church, we've demeaned that by turning it into a formula. Tick this box, come down to the front, do this, say this, and you'll be fine. No. Yeah, you're not fine. It's a relational thing. So anyway, sorry, George.
No, please don't apologize. Great, thank you, David. We've got time for one more question.
One more.
If, any from the floor? No?
Yeah.
Oh, Ian? Thanks.
Thanks, David. Look, this isn't a lighter note with Homo Deus getting wars wrong.
Yeah.
With the increased risk of nuclear war, how should Christians react to that? They seem to have options of we must avoid nuclear at all costs, so give in, or it's going to bring on the second coming.
Bring it on.
Or somewhere in between. Any thoughts on Christian reaction to increased risks?
Look, honestly, first of all, I'm 100% convinced there'll be no Twitter in heaven, because Twitter drives me nuts, and Christians on Twitter drive me even nuttier, because I'm just thinking, you're kidding me. I've heard Christians on Twitter say, you know, we have to. One guy was arguing, and he said, if we kill Putin, no more Ukrainians will be killed. And I'm going, haven't you read the Bible? Don't you know what humanity is? Because humanity is at one and the same time made in God's image and wonderful. And yet precisely because of that, because we're fallen, we can also do incredible evil. And the notion that any government or individual can stop evil completely is one of the most evil things in the world, because it leads to a utopianism which becomes fundamentalist and incredibly dangerous. The job of government, you know, my nickname at university was Red Robo, so that probably indicates where my politics were. But the job, I would say this to any who profess themselves to be conservative. You need to understand what G.K. Chesterton said. The point of conservatism is to restrain evil. You can't eradicate it, you can't eliminate it. Now, for me, the idea of risking nuclear war, I'm sorry, I would love to go and sort out China, North Korea, Sudan, Syria, Boko Haram in Nigeria, Putin in Russia, the EU while you're at it, Biden and so on. Well, what am I going to do? You know, I'm going to go around and kill everyone who doesn't agree with me? No, sometimes the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know. Personally, couldn't stand Colonel Gaddafi. I think it was one of the stupidest decisions in Western politics ever to get rid of Gaddafi without having a replacement. Invading Iraq thinking that the Iraqis just wanted to be like us, you know, nice Western liberals, was one of the most insane policies of all. And so I think actually the neocons in America and the UK and Australia as well, they were dangerous because they didn't have an adequate doctrine of humanity. They didn't realize that humans are just, you know, it's as dangerous as me saying to, you know, my daughter when she was 8 years old, sweetheart, if a man asks you to go up to his room and he wants to give you toys and lollipops, that's fine. Human beings are basically good. You just do that. You know, it's crazy. So I think the nuclear war thing, there is that mutual deterrence. Yeah, it works until you get a dictator in power who's got nothing to lose and believes that his death is the end of the world. If you believe that the world's going to be destroyed anyway, it's only got 12 years to go, that you are going to die and go nowhere, and that you're being attacked, well, why not? Wipe things out. Why not speed things up? I mean, our philosophies have enormous practical consequences. On the other hand, if you believe that you have to answer to God, if you believe that all human beings are made in God's image, then you're not going to go around nuking people. You know, so there's a whole range of enormous. I think nuclear war is probably not much nearer than it was before. It's just we're seeing it a little bit. My bigger fear would, to be honest with, I think biological war is much more likely. And I also think economic war, by the way. I'm still looking for someone to explain the difference to me between killing people by starving them and killing them by shooting them. I'm not sure there's that much difference. Personally, I prefer to be shot, but that's not an invitation.
Thank you, David. Would you please join with me in thanking Red Robbo for... No, you should never have told me that. That's not the last time you're going to hear that. Okay, if this is your first time here, or if you're not on our contact list, you'll find within the papers that you've got an opportunity to give us details of who you are, and we can get in touch with you and let you know what else is happening here on City Legal. You can also do it via the QR code, which you'll find on the back of your outline, and which, for those online, is in the chat function. We're going to have a break over the school holidays, and our next City Legal talk is scheduled for Thursday, the 28th of April. And David Auld, who many of you will know, who has spoken here before, will be commencing a series. I haven't been told what it is, but I'm sure that it'll be compelling. For those who are members of Hope Groups, our Hope Groups will be meeting next Thursday, the 7th, at the Atrio. If you're not in a Hope Group, our small groups, which meet each alternate Thursday, again, let us know, and we'd be more than happy to introduce you to our Hope Group system. That's it for us today. Thank you all for being here, both in the room and online, and we look forward to seeing you all again very soon. Thank you.